Today I'm going to talk about 3 books which all share a stylistic device, and that device is called a lipogram. Now, a lipogram is where you deliberately omit the use of one or more letters of the alphabet, and the opposite of that is an anti-lipo, where you actually keep returning time and again. You highlight, not necessarily a letter, but a formal element of it. I myself have written anti-lipograms. So, for example, where a small unit of a larger word is repeated in every single line. So I've done one around the word line, and I've done one around the word stone, and I've done one around the word gram. But my pieces are very short. And what's remarkable about this one, George Perec's A Void, is it's a 280-page novel without a single letter E, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. Also slightly ironic, since his name on the spine has 4 E's in it. But what's really remarkable, I think, is the work of his translator, Gilbert Adair, who sort of honoured that formal discipline and has translated 280 pages of French without a single letter E into the English, which, I mean, it's hard enough in French. But, for example, in French, where you've got the word le, you can get away with it by when it appears in front of a noun that begins with a vowel, then it becomes L apostrophe. In English, there are no there's. There's no he, no she, no we. So I think Adair did a tremendous job on that. Okay, so before we get into the reason why, what is the effect of a book without the most commonly used letter in the English alphabet, which is the letter E? And it does sound different as you're reading it, because on some level, whenever you read, you're hearing it inside your head. And if you don't have the letter E and that whole range of vowel sounds attendant on it, it definitely changes that sound. And when you start this book, I think you very quickly become very conscious that this sounds a little different. So just reading a section here. Okay, Augustus found that dunking it, so to say, in his bath would straightway bring about an agonising pain in his body, a constantly throbbing itch, a chafing inflammation, so sharp, stinging and prickly, that notwithstanding a will of iron, it was soon impossibly difficult for him to stand it, aching, tingling, vomiting, and in addition losing sight of that swooning bliss that was his bath's vital, capital, cardinal alibi, its primary motivation, its basic goal. So the preponderance of I sounds, we've only got 4 vowels to play with. It sort of it reduces the range of sounder words, not just words, but the sounder words as you're reading along. So that was sort of dominated by the letter I and I sounds, and it's almost as if, interestingly, as the further into the novel you go, you're not hearing it anymore, or not hearing it as different anymore. So in the beginning, it certainly sounds different in your head, but as you get into it, it isn't. And it's almost as if that sort of expunging of the letter E, the other vowel sounds and the other letters sort of move in, and they sort of condense against each other, and they sort of seal the breach. So that, there better be good stylistic reasons for not including the letter E, because while it does something to the sound, that wears off. And I think that's an interesting thing in itself, that you're sort of, as you enter the world of the book, including the sound of the words, you adjust so that it's no longer an issue or no longer stands out. So why is this book written without letter E's? Okay. The first thing to say is, as brilliant as a job that Adair did on the translation, I think the title is or the English translation of the title is problematic. Now, that may not be down to Adair, that may be down to the publishers. But A Void is referring to the fact that, there's a void, a missing letter, the missing letter E. But in the original French, it was la disparition, which sort of translates to a disappearance. And I think that is the sentiment behind the device of not having letter E's, that it's an erasure, it's a deletion. But all of those words, of course, begin with the letter E, so you can't use it in the title. So that's what the book is about. It is about erasures, deletions, things missing. So it starts off with a character called Anton Val, which is spelled without the letter E, it's Vowl, who disappears. And his friends sort of go on his trail to try and find out what's happened to him. And they sort of gradually all gather in this sort of big mansion. And it gets a bit sort of Agatha Christie-like, although it's much more literary than that, where they're all gathered together and one by one they sort of start dropping dead. So in terms of plot, it's, as I say, it's a mixture of Agatha Christie, 1001 Nights, and Arthur Schnitzler's play La Ronde, in which you would start with a playlet, and then one of the minor characters from that playlet would then go on to become the main character in the second playlet. Then a minor character in the second playlet would go on to be the major. So that's why it's called La Ronde, in sort of the round. It's like a cycle. And the structure of this novel, in terms of plot, is a bit like that, where each of these characters has a section, and then they may or may not end up themselves getting bumped off. And the whole book is about erasure of people, literally in the sense that they get bumped off. But gradually you realise that the theme of the book is about parents and children who are separated from one another and grow up without the knowledge of who their parents are, or where their child currently lives. And all the characters are linked by this. And the reason that this happens is because there's a curse that's sort of following all the characters around. It's a family curse. It's not a metaphysical curse. I mean, there's sort of human agency behind it. And interestingly, the word that Perec uses, which we translate to curse, is malediction, as in malediction, but of course you can't have the E. So he used the word malediction, which is literally bad diction or bad language. So it's sort of a pun on that. And as a book, some of those sort of plots within plots, or the round element, are, sort of fabulously entertaining. About, one set in Albania and one set in Turkey, so they're quite exotic. As you sort of follow the reason why these characters have come together, what their link to Vowel is, and why they're dying and being bumped off. So that's essentially the plot. Now, is the erasure of the letter E, does that enhance that? Is somehow the erasure of the letter E, does that stand for the erasure of the characters? Both a literal erasure in their death, but also the erasure of their family ties. And the author Tom McCarthy, who I very much admire, has suggested that in French the words mother and father are mère and père, words that Perec couldn't use within the confines of this novel. And his own parents were killed during the war, one in a concentration camp and one in battle. And McCarthy suggests that is the erasure that Perec is writing about. His own parents were erased from him. Now, I don't know if McCarthy is saying that in his own view, or whether he's seen or heard Perec say that, but I don't buy it. There's one Jews do not appear in this novel. Maybe again you'd say, well, that's because Hitler tried to erase them from European history. There's one reference to the word Holocaust right towards the end of the novel. It's sort of used in reference to all the characters who have sort of suffered a Holocaust, but of course that's not on the same scale as the actual Holocaust. So I'm unconvinced by that. I'm unconvinced that somehow this is symbolic. The relations of children and parents in this novel somehow stands for Perec's. That may or may not be true, but again, it doesn't tie up, in my mind, with the reason for leaving out the letter E. And there are elements in the book where it does make sense. So, for example, there's a meeting place at a horse track, and there's a race which is supposed to have 26 horses, but one of the horses scratches, so it's down to 25. And the horse that is scratched is number 5, and E is the 5th letter in the alphabet. So there's a few things like that. There's a code in the book, coded message, which can only be solved by a sort of a recourse to a sort of a variant of Mayan language, which only has 25 letters. So I think where the book reinforces this notion of why the letter E is missing, why a 26-letter alphabet has become a 25-letter alphabet, that works. But the wider symbolic things, I don't think are established enough. So I was talking with someone on Goodreads about I was going to read this book, and she said, "Oh, that sounds too gimmicky to me." And I think that raises an important question. If you're going to do these sort of formal sort of narrative sort of things, they mustn't be tricksy, they mustn't be gimmicky, they must be embedded in the text. And my problem with this, as much as I enjoyed it as a book and its storytelling, is I didn't feel the two elements matched up. I didn't think the symbolic value of erasure of the letter E was justified by the various erasures in the book, because they weren't strong enough, or they were too generalised and too oblique really for me. So I'm glad I read it. It is the daddy of this sort of thing, but it didn't quite work for me. And in the end, it worked for me as a book telling stories, sort of wonderful sort of historical stuff about Albania and Turkey, but not as this sort of postmodern experimentalist thing about the Lipogram. Okay, so on to the second one. This is called Eunoia, I think that's how it's pronounced, by Christian Bock. Now, Eunoia is the shortest word in the English language that contains all 5 vowels, and it means beautiful writing. And on one level, you can see why it's called that. Because the title is about sort of containing all 5 vowels, the heart of this book is 5 sections, one devoted to each vowel, in which each section, every single word contains at least one of the vowels. So the section on the letter A, every single word has at least one A in it. On the section on the E, every single one has an E in it, etc., etc. And again, it took him 7 years to write this. And again, the discipline of that is admirable. But does it rise above that device to tell us more? Now, unlike Perec, which is a genuine plot with a structure, this is much more sort of impressionistic. There's sort of little tone poems really. So they're all sort of quite short. All the pages look like that, and each one of these sections has a theme within it. So every one of the AEIOU sections has one on food or a banquet, has one on a sailing voyage, has one with what else might it have? Writing. So each one of them has that, and they do differ sort of page to page. And again, like the Perec, what it does to the sound of reading it is fabulous. So for example, this is from the letter I. Slick pimps bribing civic kingpins, distill gin in stills, spiking drinks with illicit pills, which might bring bliss. So, it sounds wonderful, and obviously that's on sort of crime and stuff. But it's interesting that even within that sort of quite tight discipline, that the 5 letter sections are all quite different, and some work and some don't. So the A works because it just feels very sensuous. There's lots of different, it's the first time you'll be introduced to each theme. So in addition to the ones that appear throughout, there's one about medical pathologies, there's one on war, and they're very sensuously, so the word use, and very evocative, and it's great. And the U, in a totally different way, is equally striking. Now, U concentrates on sort of sex and dirt and grime, and has the wonderful line, if I can find it, where are we? Oh yes, gru grubs plus fungus, slugs, mulch up humus pulp. So here the writing is a lot more sort of staccato and a lot more urgent, as the letter U might suggest. So those two really worked for me, but the ones in the middle, the E, I and O, didn't work at all. And the reason for that is it sort of stems back to the narrator. So the letter A, you have a king or you have that letter A for a noun. The letter E, you have we or he or she. You have that facility. And also there was a sort of Helen of Troy type character. The letter U, he slightly sort of cheated, because he sort of uses Alfred Jarry's creation Ubu, and the name of the character is Ubu. With the letter I, you've got the I as in first person singular, but O didn't have a sort of character heading through which these words pour. And what you realise that what he relied on in places to sort of produce these sort of beautifully balanced paragraphs was lists. So he's listing food, or he's listing animals, or he's listing city names, And these are very unsatisfactory because they are lists. They're not narrative really. I mean, I know you could use a list in a narrative way, but in here they're not. They're sort of filler, and that unfortunately that comes through, and I think is a weakness of the book, and that's why I think E, I, and O. Once the sort of originality of the A, the freshness of the A is worn off, E, I, and O don't work terribly well, and it's only U which sort of pulls it back round at the end because U is delicious, really, in a grimy way. So I'm not sure about this book really. I mean, it'll only take you half an hour to read. It's not very long. It's not only about the bit about the 5 vowels. There's a couple of other sort of doodles really in the back. One of them is called Amended Excess, and is his homage to Perec. I mean, Perec is clearly and overtly recognised influence on this book. And in Amended Excess, it's as if he's putting all of Perec's letter E's back into the section, so every word has E's in it. So a bit unsatisfying really. I think it's unsatisfying because I'm ultimately, as beautiful as it is in places to read, it's an exercise. It's not a coherent whole. It doesn't advance your understanding of anything. It's all focused on the device. And then we come to this third book, LMNOP, which if you think about it, LMNOP, and that is what this book is. And unlike both of these two, I think this is the apotheosis of a lipogram. The story is that the guy who supposedly invented the phrase, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, which represents every one of the 26 letters of the alphabet in one sentence in the fewest number of letters, is called Nevin Nolop. And that just off the coast of South Carolina, there's this independent island called Nolop, of which he is the sort of founding father, or at least the sort of, the celebrity. And there's a cenotaph in his memory, and on top of the cenotaph is that phrase, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And it all seems to be very normal, and the characters write letters to each other. The whole book is epistolary, it's letter writing. But the problems start when the letter Z falls off from the whatever it's called, the entablature or whatever, of the cenotaph, because the local council, who are 5 people, in their wisdom say this is a message from beyond the grave, from Nolop, the deity, telling us that we've got far too complacent and stale in our use of language, and therefore to sort of reinvigorate that, from henceforth on the letter Z is banned, both in spoken conversation, in our letters, and in any other way that it arises. And it's a 3 strikes and out policy. For your first offence of using a letter Z, you get a reprimand. For the second, you have the choice either of being flogged or you go in the stocks. And for the third, you're banished. And if it's a really, really dire case, you will be put to death. And what you realise is that as more and more letters fall off and more letters are prescribed, this is a book about tyranny, despotism and censorship, because people are having to censor how they talk, how they write letters to or what the content of what they write in their letters to each other, because they don't want to fall foul of these prescriptions, although many do and are transported out the country. Others flee because they can't live under such a tyranny, and their property is expropriated by the local council. So they are behaving absolutely despotically, and they're also behaving more and more as a sort of religious priesthood. That they are saying that Nolop is this divinity and this is his holy word coming down to us. And there's a resistance movement, obviously, but the resistance takes the form of a challenge for them to write an alternative pangram, including all the letters of the alphabet, all 26. And they only have 32 letters to do it in, which is quite a challenge. But I think this is a beautifully crafted book. It's very simple. So gradually, as more and more of the letters drop out of usage, you realise that language, it becomes more infantile. It also just sort of briefly throws an illumination on how pidgins and Creole languages arise, because there's speech here in which there's sort of no linking words, and it's very much the sound of the word. And interestingly, the priesthood, the bureaucracy, they decide, as they're losing so many letters, that now a sort of phonetic speech and a phonetic spelling is allowed. So, for example, the letter F has disappeared, but you can use PH. You can spell words with PH to have the F sound. And instead of the word and, you'd say the word ant. And people gradually realise that's what you mean. So again, that touches back on the notion of Creole and Pidgin, where you forge a shared communication by sort of melding existing languages together. And as I say, this is a wonderful book. It reminded me a bit of Orwell's writing, both the sort of the critique in 1984 of totalitarianism, but also Animal Farm on it. It's light. This is a light, gentle, mocking satire, but so effective. In a way, I think that these two sadly aren't, because here it's utterly embedded in why these letters are being erased. They're falling off the cenotaph memorial. The people in charge said, right, that's a sign from God, we cannot use these letters. And each chapter progresses with fewer and fewer letters left to the writer to write and for us to read. Ironically, of course, by choosing to make it epistolary, people are writing letters in which they have increasingly fewer and fewer letters, as in characters, into which to employ. So I think it's that question of is this tricksy? Is this gimmicky? Is it done for the sake of done? And I'm not accusing Perec of that. I just don't think it quite works. Didn't for me. I am accusing Block of that this is just an exercise in style with a certain formal restriction that he's put on himself. But here it utterly works because it's utterly embedded. It's organic. It's key to the plot and the message that the author wants to convey. So 3 books, all sort of stylistically linked, to different degrees of success, I would argue. And till next time.